You always make everything harder, Evelyn.
Amber said it with that practiced sigh of hers, the one that pretends exhaustion while hiding pure contempt. And just like that, the room erupted in laughter, at me, never with me. That single moment, that casual cruelty delivered over mashed potatoes and green beans, was the beginning of my awakening. But it was also, though they didn't know it yet, the beginning of their reckoning. You see, they thought I was finished, a harmless old woman who'd quietly fade into the wallpaper of their convenient little lives. What they didn't realize was that I still held every card that mattered, and I was about to play them all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I continue, I want to say something to anyone listening who knows this feeling, that sharp sting of being dismissed in your own family, treated like a burden instead of a blessing. You're not alone, and you're not powerless, no matter how small they make you feel. If you've got a story like mine, share it, even if it's just a few words, even if you're scared. And if you're not ready for that, just leave a comment with where you're from. Let's build a community of voices that refuse to be silenced anymore. We've earned our place at the cable. It's time we took it back. Now, let me tell you how it all started. I'd been living a steady, predictable life in suburban Jacksonville, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knows everyone, where the lawns are trimmed and the smiles are tight. My late husband, Robert, and I built a comfortable existence here, modest but secure, built on careful planning and his steady income. When he passed 3 years ago, I thought I'd lose myself entirely. The grief was suffocating, but I survived by doing what I'd always done, keeping things organized, maintaining the systems we'd built together, making sure the finances stayed stable. For my family. Always for my family. Scott, my son, worked a corporate job that never quite paid enough. Amber, his wife, had expensive tastes and a social calendar that required constant funding. And my 2 grandchildren, God, I loved those kids, needed so much. Tuition, activities, clothes, trips. I helped. Quietly. Constantly. My name was still on the accounts Robert and I had opened decades ago. My credit, built carefully over 50 years of responsible decisions, kept the family's borrowing power strong. I co-signed loans. I covered gaps. I asked for nothing in return except to be treated with basic human dignity. That, apparently, was too much to ask. The disrespect started small. So small I told myself I was imagining it. Amber would glance at me when I spoke, her eyes doing that subtle roll that said, "Here she goes again." She'd interrupt me mid-sentence to correct some trivial detail, her voice dripping with that condescending patience you'd use with a confused child. Scott would nod along absently when I offered advice, then do exactly what Amber suggested instead. At family dinners, conversations would flow around me like I was a stone in a river, present but irrelevant. I felt myself shrinking, not physically, though my body was doing that too, but shrinking in the way that mattered, in the space I occupied in rooms, in the weight my words carried, in the respect I commanded, or didn't. The worst part, I let it happen. I told myself it was temporary, that they were stressed, that young families have pressures I couldn't understand. I made excuses for them because the alternative, acknowledging that my own son had stopped seeing me as a person, was too painful to face. But that night, that God-forsaken Tuesday night in late September, we were all gathered at their house for dinner. Nothing special, just the usual weekly obligation. I'd brought dessert, a lemon cake I'd spent the afternoon baking because it was Scott's favorite when he was young. Amber barely glanced at it. "Oh, we're actually watching our sugar intake right now," she announced brightly. pushing the cake to the side like it was contaminated. I felt the sting, but swallowed it. Then came the conversation about the kids' school trip. Some overnight thing to Washington, D.C., expensive. They were discussing whether they could afford it. I offered to help, just like I always did. That's when Amber dropped her fork, looked at Scott, looked back at me, and let out that long, theatrical sigh. "You always make everything harder, Evelyn." The room froze for a heartbeat. Then Scott snorted. Actually snorted. And suddenly, they were all laughing. Scott, Amber, even my 13-year-old grandson, who'd been taught by example that grandma was fair game. The 10-year-old looked confused, but smiled anyway, not wanting to be left out. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, my lemon cake rejected and forgotten, while my family laughed at the absurdity of my existence. Something cracked inside me that night. Something that had been bending under pressure for years finally snapped clean through. I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. I didn't make a scene. I just sat there, memorizing every face, every laugh, every casual betrayal. And I made myself a promise. When I got home that night, I walked straight to my bedroom closet and pulled down the boxes I'd kept stacked neatly on the top shelf. Inside were years of documents, contracts, bank statements, tax records, access logs, everything from the life Robert and I built together. Everything that still ran under my name, my credit, my carefully maintained stability. I spread the papers across my bed and began reading. Really reading. Not just filing and organizing like I usually did, but analyzing, looking for patterns. And there they were. Small irregularities at first. Transactions I didn't recognize, deductions that shouldn't exist, money moving in directions I'd never approved. My hands started trembling as the picture became clear. Someone had been helping themselves to my accounts. Someone who had access because I'd trusted them. Someone who smiled to my face while robbing me behind my back. I know now exactly what I'm going to do about it. But that discovery, that moment when I realized just how deep the betrayal ran, that comes next. The irregularities I found that night weren't dramatic, not at first glance anyway. A withdrawal here, a transfer there, amounts that seemed reasonable if you weren't paying close attention. But I'd spent 50 years managing household finances with Robert. I knew our systems, I knew our patterns, and these transactions didn't fit. I sat on my bed until nearly 2 in the morning, sorting through statements with my reading glasses sliding down my nose. The house was so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator humming 2 rooms away. That particular kind of silence that comes when you live alone, when the person who used to ask, "Still up, honey?" is gone forever. But that night, the silence felt different, sharper, like it was making space for something new to emerge. I started making notes, dates, amounts, account numbers I didn't recognize. My handwriting got messier as exhaustion set in, but I kept going, because with each page I turned, each statement I cross-referenced, the picture became clearer and uglier. By dawn, I had a working timeline. Small amounts at first, started about 18 months ago, then gradually increasing, always just under the threshold that would trigger automatic alerts. Clever, calculated, deliberate. The coffee maker beeped at 6:30 like it did every morning. I hadn't slept. My back ached from hunching over paperwork. My eyes burned. But my mind was crystalline, sharp in a way it hadn't been in years. I knew who was behind this. I just needed proof that would hold up beyond my own suspicions. The next few days passed in a fog of normalcy. I went to the grocery store, I attended my book club meeting, I smiled at neighbors and pretended everything was fine. But underneath, I was watching, listening, paying attention to details I'd let slide for too long. Scott called midweek to ask if I could watch the kids Saturday. Amber had some charity luncheon. His voice carried that casual expectation. Of course I'd say yes. I always said yes. Of course, sweetheart, I told him, my voice warm and accommodating, just like always. But this time, I had a purpose beyond simply being useful. Saturday arrived with that thick Florida humidity that makes your clothes stick to your skin. I showed up at their house at noon with cookies I'd baked, chocolate chip, the kids' favorite. The 10-year-old, Mia, threw her arms around my waist when I walked in. That pure, uncomplicated affection nearly undid my resolve. Nearly. Amber breezed through the living room in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She smelled like expensive perfume, something floral and aggressive. "You're a lifesaver, Evelyn," she said breezily, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her tone suggested she'd just bestowed a tremendous favor by allowing me to babysit my own grandchildren. I smiled, happy to help. She didn't even look at me when she grabbed her purse and headed out, just called over her shoulder for the kids to behave and slammed the door behind her. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I got to work. Not with the kids. They settled in front of the TV with cookies and their tablets. I had maybe 3 hours, maybe 4 if the luncheon ran long. I started in the home office. The door wasn't locked. Why would it be? I was just harmless old Evelyn, too confused to be a threat. Their filing system was chaos. Papers stuffed into drawers without organization. Bills mixed with receipts, mixed with junk mail. It made my fingers itch just looking at it. But chaos has its own patterns if you know how to read it. I found the first credit card statement buried under a stack of takeout menus, an account I'd never seen before. Not one of the ones tied to my credit or my co-signatures. This was something else, something separate. The charges made my stomach turn. Designer handbags, spa treatments, restaurants I couldn't pronounce. Thousands of dollars every month, on a card Stott and Amber supposedly didn't have. I took photos with my phone. My hands shook slightly as I held the device. I'd only recently learned how to use the camera function. My grandson had shown me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Then I found the investment paperwork, tucked in a folder marked insurance, as if that would keep people from looking. Some company called Premier Wealth Advisors, very official sounding, the kind of name designed to inspire confidence. The documents promised incredible returns, 12% annually, guaranteed. I'd been married to an accountant for 43 years. I knew enough to recognize a scam when I saw one. And there, at the bottom of the agreement, in the section listing account funding sources, my name, my bank account, my routing numbers. They'd been funneling money from accounts I controlled into this scheme, without asking, without telling me, just helping themselves to funds I'd carefully saved and managed. The rage that swept through me was so intense I had to sit down. My heart hammered, my vision blurred at the edges. For a moment I thought I might actually have a heart attack right there in their messy office. That would have been convenient for them, wouldn't it? I forced myself to breathe, slowly, counted to 10, then 20, then took more photos. I found bank statements showing transfers, emails with the advisor, some smooth-talking man named Derek who signed his messages with excessive exclamation points. I found receipts for purchases that would have fed a family for months, all of it funded by money they'd taken from me, from accounts I'd built, from security I'd created, from stability Robert and I had worked our entire lives to establish. They'd stolen it, casually, systematically, while laughing at me over dinner. I heard Mia call from the living room. "Grandma, can we have more cookies?" "Of course, sweetie," I called back, my voice somehow steady despite the fury burning through my chest. I finished photographing everything, put every paper back exactly where I'd found it, closed the drawers, straightened the folders. When Amber returned 4 hours later, slightly tipsy and smelling like wine, I was sitting on the couch reading a storybook to Mia. The picture of a devoted grandmother. "How were they?" Amber asked, dropping her purse on the counter with a heavy thud. "Perfect angels," I said warmly. "We had a wonderful time." She barely acknowledged me, just headed upstairs to change, already scrolling through her phone. I gathered my things, hugged the kids goodbye, drove home in silence. That night, I printed every photo, organized them chronologically, cross-referenced them with my own statements, built a case that even a skeptic couldn't deny. And then I made a phone call to someone I thought might understand, someone who'd seen this kind of thing before. My neighbor Martha answered on the second ring. Martha came over 20 minutes after I called. She didn't ask questions on the phone, just said she'd bring tea and be right there. That's the thing about real friendship. It doesn't need explanations before showing up. When I opened the door, she took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. She smelled like lavender soap and that particular warmth that comes from people who genuinely care. I hadn't realized how much I needed that embrace until it happened. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Robert and I used to do our monthly budget reviews, where we'd plan vacations and calculate college funds and dream about retirement. Now it was covered with printed bank statements and highlighted receipts. Martha poured the tea she brought, chamomile, calming, and waited for me to speak. "I think my daughter-in-law has been stealing from me," I said quietly. The words felt strange in my mouth, shameful almost. Like admitting this made me weak or foolish. Martha's expression didn't change. She just nodded slowly and reached for the nearest stack of papers. "Show me," she said simply, her voice steady and practical. So I did. I walked her through everything I'd found. The secret credit card, the investment scheme, the transfers from my accounts, the timeline showing how it had escalated over 18 months. Martha worked at the community center 3 days a week. She volunteered at the financial assistance desk, helping seniors navigate Medicare billing and Social Security paperwork, but her real expertise came from experience. She'd been a bookkeeper for 30 years before retiring. She studied my documents with the same focused intensity I remembered from watching Robert work. Her reading glasses perched on her nose, her lips pressed into a thin line. After 20 minutes of silence, she looked up. "Evelyn, this is worse than you think," she said gravely. Her words weighted with genuine concern. My stomach dropped. "How?" She tapped one of the investment agreements. "This company, Premier Wealth Advisors, I've seen this name before. There was a couple at the center last month, completely devastated. They'd lost their entire retirement savings to this exact operation." The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the table. Martha continued, her voice getting harder. "It's a Ponzi scheme. They promise guaranteed returns that sound too good to be true because they are too good to be true. They pay early investors with money from new investors. Eventually, it collapses." "How much did that couple lose?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Everything. Nearly $200,000, Martha said bluntly, not sugarcoating the truth. I felt sick, actually physically nauseated. How much have they put into it from my accounts? We spent the next hour calculating, cross-referencing transfers with dates, adding up amounts that had seemed small individually, but were devastating in aggregate. $47,000. $47,000 of my money, mine and Robert's, funneled into a scam by my own family. I stood up abruptly, walked to the sink, stared out the window at my small backyard where Robert used to garden. The tomato plants were overgrown now. I didn't have his patience for maintenance. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Martha came to stand beside me. Her hand found my shoulder. "You fight back," she said firmly, each word deliberate and strong. "You reclaim what's yours. You don't let them take anything else." "But they're my family," I said weakly, hating how pathetic I sounded. "Family doesn't steal from you, Evelyn," Martha shot back, her tone sharp with protective anger. "Family doesn't mock you. Family doesn't treat you like a convenient bank account with no feelings attached." She was right. I knew she was right, but accepting it meant accepting something much larger and more painful, that my son had stopped seeing me as his mother somewhere along the way. We sat back down. Martha pulled out a notepad and started making lists. She was a woman of action, always had been. "First, you need to secure your accounts. Change passwords, remove any shared access, make sure nothing else can leave without your explicit approval." I nodded, taking notes of my own. "Second, you need to contact the bank about these unauthorized transfers. This is fraud, Evelyn. Actual criminal fraud." The word made me flinch. Criminal. As if we were talking about strangers, not my son's wife. "Third," Martha continued, her pen tapping the paper for emphasis, "you need to decide how far you're willing to take this. Are you willing to report them? Are you willing to press charges if it comes to that?" Was I? The question hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. Martha's expression softened. "You don't have to decide that tonight, but you do need to protect yourself immediately. Stop the bleeding before you figure out how to treat the wound." We worked until nearly midnight. Martha helped me access all my online banking accounts. We changed every password to something Scott and Amber couldn't guess. We set up alerts for any transaction over $50. We documented everything with timestamps and screenshots. By the time Martha left, I was exhausted, but I was also something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Powerful. For the first time since Robert died, I wasn't simply reacting to life. I was taking control of it, making decisions, setting boundaries, refusing to be passive. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept spinning through possibilities, scenarios, confrontations, each one ending differently. By morning, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. Not until I had absolutely everything I needed to make my case irrefutable. I spent the next week gathering more evidence. I contacted my bank and requested complete transaction histories for the past 3 years. I filed a complaint about the fraudulent investment scheme. I even drove to the community center and spoke to the couple Martha had mentioned. Hearing their story made my blood run cold. They'd trusted someone too, then promised security, lost everything. That wasn't going to be me. I organized everything into a 3-ring binder, color-coded tabs, highlighted sections, a timeline that showed exactly when the theft started and how it had accelerated, account statements proving the money was mine, transfer records showing where it went. It was airtight, undeniable, the kind of evidence that couldn't be explained away with excuses or tears or manipulation. And then I did something I'd been afraid to do for 3 years. I picked up the phone and called my bank's fraud department. The woman who answered had a kind voice, patient. She listened to my entire story without interrupting. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. Then she said something that changed everything. "Mrs. Patterson, based on what you're describing, you have grounds to freeze all accounts where unauthorized access has occurred. Would you like to proceed with that action?" My heart pounded. This was it, the point of no return. Once I said yes, there would be no pretending everything was fine, no more playing the accommodating grandmother, no more silence. Yes, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I would like to freeze the accounts. I'll start that process immediately, she said crisply. All business now. It will take effect within 24 hours. Is there anything else you need? I thought about Amber's face when she realized what I'd done, about Scott's panic when his card stopped working, about the children asking questions nobody would want to answer, and I felt absolutely nothing except cold, clear resolve. No, I told her. That will be all. I hung up the phone and sat in my quiet house, listening to the clock tick on the wall. Tomorrow, everything would change. The accounts froze at exactly 9:17 the following morning. I know because I was sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee when the bank sent the confirmation email. My hands trembled slightly as I read it. Not from fear, from anticipation. The first call came 30 minutes later. Scott's name flashed on my phone screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Let him sweat a little. "Hi, sweetheart," I said warmly, as if nothing had changed. "Mom, something's wrong with the accounts," he said urgently, his words tumbling over each other in panic. "My card got declined at the gas station. Amber's not working either. Did something happen?" I took a slow sip of coffee. Let the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. "Oh yes, I had the bank freeze everything temporarily," I said casually, like I was discussing the weather. "Just some irregularities I needed to sort out." "Irregularities?" His voice cracked slightly. "What kind of irregularities?" "Nothing for you to worry about right now, dear," I said sweetly, dripping with false reassurance. "I'm sure we can discuss it when things settle down." I could hear Amber's voice in the background, sharp, demanding. Scott covered the phone, but I caught fragments. "What did she do?" And "Fix this now." "Mom, you can't just freeze our accounts," Scott said desperately, trying to sound authoritative but failing. "Our accounts," I repeated softly, letting the question hang. "Interesting choice of words, Scott." He went quiet. I could practically hear his brain scrambling for the right response. "Look, we'll come over tonight and figure this out," he said finally, his tone shifting to placating. "There's obviously been some misunderstanding." "Yes," I agreed calmly, satisfaction warming my chest. "There certainly has been." I hung up before he could respond. The second call came from Amber 20 minutes later. I didn't answer, let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message, but I could imagine what she wanted to say. By afternoon, I had 17 missed calls. Text messages piled up, each one more frantic than the last. I ignored them all. Instead, I drove to the community center where Martha volunteered. It was Tuesday, her regular shift at the financial help desk. The center smelled like industrial cleaner and burnt coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A group of seniors was doing chair yoga in the main room. Martha looked up when I walked into her small office. One glance at my face and she smiled knowingly. "You did it," she said with quiet pride. "I did it," I confirmed, sinking into the chair across from her desk. "How do you feel?" I considered the question honestly. Terrified, powerful, guilty, triumphant all at once. Martha laughed, a rich, genuine sound. "That sounds about right." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Martha pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed before. "I did some digging after we talked," she said seriously, her expression shifting to concern. "About that investment company. About this Derek character they've been dealing with." My stomach tightened. "And?" "He's part of a larger operation. They target families with older members who have good credit and accessible assets," she explained, her voice low and urgent. They befriend the younger generation, make them feel sophisticated and included, then slowly bleed the family's resources dry. She slid several printed pages across the desk, articles about the scheme, complaints filed with the state attorney general, photos of other victims, faces worn down by betrayal and loss. There are at least 15 documented cases in Northeast Florida alone. Most victims are women over 65. Most perpetrators are family members or close friends who had access to their accounts. The words hit me like physical blows. This wasn't just about Amber's greed or Scott's weakness. This was organized, systematic, predatory. The couple I mentioned before, the ones who lost everything, Martha's voice dropped even lower. The wife tried to report it. Her own daughter convinced her not to, told her it would destroy the family. 6 months later, their house was in foreclosure. I felt sick. What happened to them? They're living with their son now, in his basement. The daughter who convinced them to stay quiet, she disappeared, moved to Atlanta with her boyfriend. The money disappeared with her. The fluorescent lights suddenly felt too bright, too harsh. The yoga class music filtered through the walls, some kind of peaceful flute that felt obscene given what we were discussing. I won't let that happen to me, I said quietly, steel threading through my voice. I know you won't, Martha said firmly, conviction radiating from her. Because you're smarter than they think, and you're not alone. She pulled out another document. This one had names and numbers, contact information. These are other women I've met through the center, all of them dealing with similar situations. Financial abuse by family members. Some worse than yours, some not as far along, she explained matter-of-factly. I took the liberty of mentioning your situation. No names, just the basics. They want to help if you need it. I stared at the list. 10 names. 10 women who understood, who'd been where I was, who'd survived. There's also this, Martha added, sliding over a business card. She's an elder law attorney, specializes in financial abuse cases. She does free consultations. The card was simple, professional. Rebecca Chen, attorney at law, a local address. I can't afford, I started. Many of her cases are pro bono, Martha interrupted gently, and the ones that aren't often get resolved before they go to court. Once families realize there's a lawyer involved, they tend to suddenly become very reasonable. I held the card between my fingers. The paper was thick, quality. It felt substantial, real. Thank you, I said, my voice catching slightly. Martha reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. Her skin was warm and papery, familiar. You've got this, Evelyn, she said with absolute certainty. You're stronger than anyone's given you credit for, including yourself. I left the community center with the folder tucked under my arm. The afternoon sun was brutal, Florida heat that made the air shimmer above the parking lot pavement. I sat in my car with the AC blasting and made a phone call to Rebecca Chen's office. The receptionist was efficient and kind. She scheduled me for Thursday morning, 2 days away. That gave me 48 hours to prepare, to gather any remaining documentation, to steel myself for whatever came next. When I got home, there were 3 more missed calls, another string of increasingly desperate texts. The last one, from Scott, simply said, "Mom, please, we need to talk about this." I replied with one word, Thursday. Then I turned my phone to silent and spread all my evidence across the dining room table. Every statement, every transfer record, every highlighted discrepancy, every piece of proof that my family had systematically robbed me while making me feel like the burden. I worked until my eyes burned and my back ached, organized everything chronologically, created a summary document that laid out the timeline in stark, undeniable terms. By the time I finished, it was nearly midnight. The house was silent except for the AC kicking on and the distant sound of traffic. I stood at my dining room table, looking at the mountain of evidence I'd assembled. This was my life, my security, my future, all of it documented in neat stacks of paper. And I was taking it back. The doorbell rang suddenly, sharp and insistent, then knocking. Loud, aggressive. I walked to the window and peeked through the curtains. Amber stood on my porch. Her face was flushed, her expression furious, and she wasn't alone.
Scott stood behind Amber on my porch. His face looked strained, exhausted, like he'd aged 5 years in 2 days. The knocking continued, harder now, more insistent. I didn't move, just watched them through the gap in the curtains. Amber's perfectly styled hair was slightly disheveled. Her designer purse hung from her shoulder like armor. She kept checking her phone between knocks. "Evelyn, we know you're home," Amber called out sharply, her voice carrying an edge of desperation disguised as authority. "Your car's in the driveway. Open the door." I could have ignored them. Could have let them pound until the neighbors noticed. Could have called the police if they didn't leave. But I didn't want to avoid this confrontation anymore. I wanted to face it. I walked to the door and opened it slowly, deliberately. Let them see I wasn't rushing, wasn't panicking, wasn't intimidated. Amber's expression shifted immediately when she saw me. The anger melted into something smoother, concerned, the mask sliding back into place. "Evelyn, thank God," she said with theatrical relief, her tone dripping with false warmth. "We've been so worried. When you froze the accounts without warning." "I gave plenty of warning," I interrupted calmly, my voice steady and cool. "You just weren't listening." Scott stepped forward. "Mom, can we come in, please? We need to talk about this." I looked at my son, really looked at him, saw the stress lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped, the weakness that had allowed this whole situation to spiral. Part of me still loved him. That part ached seeing him like this. But the stronger part, the part that had been organizing evidence and building a case, knew this conversation needed to happen on my terms. "You have 5 minutes," I said flatly, leaving no room for negotiation.
I stepped back and let them in. Didn't offer them seats, didn't offer coffee or water. Just stood in my living room with my arms crossed and waited. Amber started immediately. Her voice took on that reasonable, patient tone she used when explaining things to the children. "Evelyn, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding," she said smoothly, concern etched across her features. "Those accounts, they're joint accounts. We all use them. You can't just freeze them without discussing it with the family first. Joint accounts that I opened, with my money, using my credit," I said quietly, each word deliberate and precise. "Money from the life insurance when Robert died, money from our retirement savings, my money." Scott rubbed his face tiredly. "Mom, yes, technically they're your accounts, but we've been managing the household finances together for years. You know that." "Managing?" I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "Is that what you call it?" Something flickered across Amber's face, just for a second. Fear, maybe, or calculation. Then the concerned expression returned. "I don't understand what you're implying," she said carefully, her words measured and controlled. I walked to the dining room, picked up the folder I'd prepared, came back and dropped it on the coffee table between us. $47,000, I said simply, my voice cold and factual. The room went completely silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. "That's how much you've taken from my accounts over the past 18 months, transferred to this investment scheme, this Premier Wealth Advisors operation." Amber's face went pale, actually pale. The carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the blood draining from her cheeks. Scott looked confused. What investment scheme? What are you talking about? I opened the folder, started laying out documents on the coffee table. Transfer records, screenshots of the investment agreements, printouts of the fraudulent company's promises. This scheme, I said calmly, pointing to the papers, the one promising 12% guaranteed returns, the one that's actually a Ponzi operation that's defrauded at least 15 other families in this area. Scott picked up one of the documents. His hands shook as he read it. His face transformed from confusion to shock to something darker. "Amber, what is this?" he asked quietly, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. It's not what it looks like," Amber stammered, her composure finally cracking. "Derek said it was legitimate. He showed us testimonials, other investors. The returns were real." "The returns were fake," I cut in sharply, satisfaction warming my chest. "Paid out with money from new victims. It's a classic scam, and you fell for it. With my money." Amber's expression shifted again. The mask dropped completely. What replaced it was something harder, uglier, defensive. "We were trying to help," she snapped, her voice rising with indignation. "We were trying to grow the family's assets, make something of that money instead of letting it sit there doing nothing." "That money was doing something," I shot back, my voice finally rising to match hers. "It was keeping you housed and fed and comfortable while you mocked me at dinner parties." Scott set the papers down. He looked sick, actually physically ill. "Mom, I didn't know about any of this," he said weakly, pleading for me to believe him. "I swear, Amber said she was working with a financial advisor. She said it was legitimate." I turned to my son. Let him see the disappointment in my eyes. "You didn't know because you didn't ask. You didn't want to know, because knowing would have required you to do something, to stand up to your wife, to protect your mother." His face crumpled. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee, who trusted me to fix everything. But that little boy was gone, and the man standing in my living room had let me be robbed. Amber's phone buzzed. She glanced at it quickly. Her expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read. Panic? Calculation? "This is ridiculous," she said suddenly, her voice hardening with renewed aggression. "You're being completely unreasonable. We're family. We don't do this to each other." The audacity of that statement took my breath away. "You're right," I said slowly, my voice dropping to something dangerous. "Family doesn't do this to each other, but you did it anyway." I picked up another document from the folder, the one I'd been saving. "This is from the bank's fraud department," I said, calmly, holding it up. "They've confirmed unauthorized access to my accounts. They're investigating the transfers, and they've recommended I contact law enforcement." The room froze. Amber's face went from pale to flushed. Scott looked between us like he'd been dropped into a nightmare. "You called the police?" Amber asked shrilly, her voice climbing toward hysteria. "On your own family?" "Not yet," I said quietly, meeting her eyes steadily. "But I will if I have to." "Mom, please," Scott begged desperately, his voice breaking. "Don't do this. Think about the kids. Think about what this would do to them." And there it was, the manipulation I'd been waiting for, using my grandchildren as leverage, as emotional blackmail. I felt something inside me harden even further. "I am thinking about them," I said firmly, my resolve absolute. "I'm thinking about what they're learning by watching their mother steal from their grandmother. I'm thinking about what kind of people they'll become if nobody shows them there are consequences." Amber's phone buzzed again. And again. Whoever was texting her was insistent. She glanced at the screen. Her expression changed completely, from anger to pure panic. "We need to go," she said abruptly, grabbing Scott's arm. Now. What? Why? Scott looked bewildered. We just need to leave, Amber insisted frantically, practically dragging him toward the door. This conversation is over. But before they could exit, I said one more thing, the thing that would change everything. I met with the couple you stole from before me. Amber froze, her hand on the doorknob, her back to me. The ones who lost everything to Derek's scheme. I continued calmly, watching her shoulders tense. They told me some very interesting things about how the operation works, about who recruits new victims. Slowly, Amber turned around. Her face was completely colorless now. What did they tell you? She whispered hoarsely, fear naked in her voice. I smiled, not warmly, not kindly. Everything, I said simply. And that's when her phone rang, the caller ID visible even from where I stood. Derek. Amber stared at her buzzing phone like it was a live snake. Derek's name flashed on the screen, once, twice, 3 times before it went to voicemail, then immediately started ringing again. Answer it, I said, calmly, my voice carrying quiet authority. I'd love to hear what he has to say. Amber's hand trembled as she declined the call. Her carefully constructed facade was completely shattered now. What remained was something raw and desperate. You don't understand, she said shakily, her words tumbling out in panic. It's more complicated than you think. Then explain it, I challenged, my tones steady and unmoved. Make me understand how stealing $47,000 from your husband's mother is complicated. Scott stood frozen between us. His face had gone gray. He looked like a man watching his entire life collapse in real time. Amber, what did you do? He asked hoarsely, pain and betrayal thick in his voice. She turned to him. Tears started forming in her eyes. Real ones this time, not the manufactured kind she'd used before. I was trying to fix things, she said desperately, reaching for his arm. We were drowning, Scott. The mortgage, the kids' school, your salary wasn't enough, and I couldn't let us fail. So you stole from my mother? Scott's voice cracked with anguish and disbelief. I was going to pay it back, Amber insisted shrilly, her desperation climbing. Derek promised the returns would cover everything. He said we'd double the money within a year. We were supposed to surprise her, give her even more than we took. I laughed, actually laughed. It came out harsh and bitter. You were going to surprise me? I repeated, mockingly, letting the absurdity hang in the air. By stealing my life savings and gambling it on a scheme that's currently under investigation by 3 state agencies? Amber's phone buzzed again. Text messages this time, rapid fire. I could see the screen lighting up repeatedly in her hand. He knows, she whispered, staring at the device with mounting terror. He knows something's wrong. Of course he knows, I said, coldly, satisfaction warming my chest. Because I filed a formal complaint yesterday with the State Attorney General's office. They're very interested in his operation. The color drained completely from Amber's face. She swayed slightly. For a moment, I thought she might actually faint. Scott caught her elbow, but the gesture wasn't comforting anymore. It was automatic, hollow. Mom, what have you done? He asked, weakly, his voice barely audible. What I should have done years ago, I said firmly. My resolve absolute. I protected myself. I protected what your father and I built. I drew a line. Amber's phone rang again. This time, she answered it. Her hands shook so badly I was surprised she could hold the device. Hello? She said breathlessly, her voice thin with fear. I couldn't hear Derek's response. but I watched Amber's face transform as she listened. Fear became something worse. Something that looked like genuine terror. I can't, she stammered frantically, stumbling over her words. She froze everything. I don't have access anymore. More talking from Derek's end. Amber's eyes darted to me, then to Scott, then to the door like she was calculating an escape route. I understand, she finally whispered shakily, her voice breaking. I'll figure it out. She hung up, stood there staring at nothing, her whole body trembling. What did he say? Scott demanded, his patience finally snapping. Amber looked at him, then at me, and I saw something in her expression I hadn't expected. Genuine fear, not of consequences, of something much more immediate. He wants his money back, she said numbly, her voice hollow and defeated. The money we invested. He says if I don't return it within 48 hours, there will be consequences. What kind of consequences? I asked sharply, alarm bells suddenly ringing in my head. Amber didn't answer, just shook her head and pressed her hands to her face. Scott grabbed her shoulders. Amber, what kind of consequences? I don't know, she cried out, her voice climbing to hysteria. He didn't say exactly, but he knows where we live. He knows about the kids. He knows everything.
The room tilted slightly. This wasn't just financial fraud anymore. This was something darker, more dangerous. Are you telling me, I said slowly, each word careful and measured, that you've gotten involved with someone who's threatening our family? It wasn't supposed to be like this, Amber sobbed, tears streaming down her face now. He was so professional, so convincing. Other couples we knew had invested with him. It seemed legitimate. Nothing about this is legitimate, Scott shouted, his control finally breaking completely. You stole from my mother. You gambled our family's future, and now you're saying we're in danger? Amber collapsed onto my couch. Her expensive purse fell to the floor, her perfectly styled exterior completely demolished. And despite everything, despite the theft and betrayal and mockery, I felt a flicker of something I didn't want to feel. Concern. Not for Amber, never for Amber, but for my grandchildren, for Scott, for the family that had hurt me but was still, somehow, my family. I sat down in the chair across from them, suddenly feeling every one of my 68 years. Tell me everything, I said tiredly, my anger giving way to grim practicality. From the beginning, no more lies. Amber looked up. Her mascara ran in dark streaks down her cheeks. She looked small, broken, nothing like the confident woman who'd mocked me at dinner. I met Derek at the country club last year, she began shakily, her voice raw and stripped of pretense. He was charming, sophisticated. He talked about investments and opportunities, made me feel smart for listening. She paused, wiped her eyes, continued. He started small, just asking questions about our finances, our goals, our challenges. I told him about the mortgage stress, the school costs, how we were barely staying ahead. Scott made a strangled sound. Amber kept talking. He said he could help, that he worked with families like ours all the time. He showed me portfolios, returns, references from other clients. It all seemed real. When did you start taking money from my accounts? I asked bluntly, cutting through the justifications. Amber flinched. About 6 months after we met. He said the opportunity was time-sensitive, that we needed to act fast. I convinced myself you wouldn't miss it, that we'd return it before you even noticed. But the returns never came, I said flatly, already knowing the answer. They came at first, Amber admitted miserably, small amounts, enough to seem legitimate.
But then they stopped, and Derek said we needed to invest more to unlock the next tier. So I took more, and now, she trailed off, didn't need to finish. We all knew how the story ended.
My phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Martha. "Excuse me," I said quietly, stepping into the kitchen to answer. "Evelyn, turn on the news," Martha said urgently, without preamble. "Channel 4, right now." I grabbed the remote from the kitchen counter, turned on the small TV I kept on the counter for morning news. The breaking news banner scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Premier Wealth Advisors. Federal investigation. Multiple arrests pending. Derek's photo flashed on screen. Smooth smile. Expensive suit. The face of a predator who'd perfected his camouflage. "They raided his office this morning," Martha explained rapidly. "Froze all his accounts. They're calling it one of the largest elder fraud operations in state history." I watched the news coverage with my heart pounding, watched them interview other victims, elderly couples who'd lost everything, families torn apart by betrayal. "Evelyn?" Martha's voice pulled me back. "Are you okay?" "I'm not sure," I admitted honestly, my voice shaking slightly. "Amber just told me he's threatening the family, demanding money back within 48 hours. Martha went quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was hard. "You need to call the police, right now. This isn't civil fraud anymore. These people are dangerous." I hung up and returned to the living room. Scott and Amber were sitting in silence, both looking shell-shocked and defeated. "Derek was arrested this morning," I announced quietly, watching their reactions. "Federal charges. The operation is shut down." Amber's face crumbled. She started sobbing, actual wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Scott just stared at me, then asked the question I'd been dreading. "What happens now, Mom?" I looked at my son, at his wife, at the mess they'd created that had pulled us all into danger, and I realized I had a choice to make, a choice that would define everything that came next. The choice wasn't as complicated as they probably hoped it would be. I looked at Scott, my son who'd let me be diminished and dismissed for years. At Amber, the woman who'd stolen from me while making me the butt of family jokes. At the mess they'd created through greed and weakness. And I realized something clarifying. I could protect them from the consequences of their actions, shield them from the justice they deserved. Let this all fade away quietly for the sake of family peace, or I could protect myself, finally, completely, without apology. "Here's what happens now," I said calmly, my voice steady with absolute resolve. "You're going to sit down, and you're going to listen, and for once in your lives, you're going to take me seriously." I walked back to the dining room, gathered the remaining documents I'd prepared, came back, and began laying them out systematically on the coffee table. "This is every unauthorized transaction from my accounts over the past 18 months, I started matter-of-factly, pointing to the first stack. $47,312. Documented, dated, highlighted. Amber stared at the papers like they were weapons aimed at her heart. "This is the investment agreement you forged my signature on," I continued coldly, moving to the next document. "Notice the date? November 14th. I was at my book club that evening. I have witnesses who can confirm I never signed this." Scott's hands trembled as he picked up the paper. His face went from gray to green as he read it. "This is the account access log from my bank," I said, my tone never wavering. "It shows every login, every transfer, every time someone claiming to be me made changes. The IP addresses trace back to your home computer, Amber." She opened her mouth, closed it. No words came out. "This is correspondence between you and Derek," I stated flatly, dropping another stack. "Emails discussing how to manage me, how to keep me comfortable and unaware. Your exact words, by the way." The room was so quiet, I could hear the wall clock ticking, could hear Amber's ragged breathing,
could hear Scott's barely contained sobs. "And this," I said, softly, holding up the final document, "is the police report I filed this morning, before Derek's arrest, before any of this became federal news." Amber's head snapped up. Pure panic flooded her features. "You didn't," she whispered hoarsely, horror coating every word. "I did," I confirmed simply, satisfaction warming my chest. "Elder financial abuse, fraud, forgery, identity theft, all documented, all reported, all official." Scott stood abruptly, his face contorted with anguish and desperation. "Mom, you can't do this," he pleaded desperately, his voice breaking. "Please, think about what this means. Amber could go to jail. The kids would lose their mother. We'd lose everything." "You should have thought about that before you lost my respect," I said quietly, each word landing like a hammer. The cruelty of that statement hung in the air. I saw it hit Scott, watched his face crumble, watched him realize that his mother, the woman he'd taken for granted his entire adult life, was done being taken for granted. "I want you both to understand something," I continued, my voice dropping to something cold and final. "This isn't about the money. Yes, the money matters. Yes, you stole from me. But what really broke us? What really made this irreparable?" I paused. Let the question breathe. "You made me feel worthless. You laughed at me. You treated me like an inconvenient burden who existed only to fund your comfortable lifestyle. And then you had the audacity to act wounded when I finally said, 'Enough.'" Amber was sobbing openly now. Mascara streaked her face in dark rivulets. Her expensive clothes looked ridiculous on someone so utterly destroyed. "I'm sorry," she choked out desperately between sobs. "I'm so sorry. I never meant. I didn't think." "You didn't think I'd notice," I finished for her, my tone acidic. "You didn't think I mattered enough to notice. That's the problem, Amber. You never thought I mattered at all." My doorbell rang. 3 sharp chimes that made everyone jump. I walked to the door, looked through the peephole. 2 police officers stood on my porch. 1 male, 1 female. Both professional, both serious. I'd called them after hanging up with Martha, told them about Derek's threats, about Amber's confession, about everything. I opened the door. "Mrs. Patterson?" the female officer asked politely, her voice calm and official. "We're responding to your call about threats made against your family." "Yes, thank you for coming," I said, with quiet dignity, stepping aside. "They're in the living room." The officers entered. Their presence changed everything, made it real, made it official, made it impossible to pretend this was just a family disagreement that could be smoothed over. Amber looked at the officers, then at me. Her expression transformed from despair to something harder, something uglier. "You vindictive bitch," she hissed venomously, her true nature finally surfacing. "You're enjoying this, destroying your own family because your feelings got hurt." The female officer's expression tightened. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down." But Amber was beyond calm, beyond control. She stood up, her body shaking with rage. "She's a bitter old woman who can't stand that she's not the center of attention anymore. She's making all this up because we don't worship the ground she walks on." "Actually," I said calmly, my voice cutting through her hysteria, "I have text messages." I pulled out my phone, pulled up the conversation I'd screenshotted earlier, the one between Amber and someone named Christina from the country club. I handed my phone to the female officer, let her read Amber's own words. Derek says the old bat is getting suspicious. Need to move faster. Can't stand these entitled boomers who think the world owes them something. Once we get enough out, we can cut her off completely. Scott will do whatever I say. The officer's expression remained neutral, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Disgust, maybe, or pity, not for Amber, but for the woman Amber had tried to victimize. Mrs. Patterson, we're going to need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement, the officer said professionally, looking directly at Amber. You're not under arrest at this time, but we have questions about your involvement with Derek Morrison's operation. Amber's bravado collapsed instantly. She started crying again, begging, making promises. Scott just sat there, broken, defeated, watching his wife destroy what little remained of their dignity. The male officer stepped forward. Mr. Patterson, we'll need a statement from you as well. Were you aware of these financial transactions? Scott looked at me. His eyes pleaded for something. Mercy, maybe, or understanding. Some of them, he admitted weakly, his voice barely audible. Not all, not the full extent, but I knew Amber was managing some investments. I didn't ask questions. Why not? The officer asked directly. Scott's answer came out as barely a whisper. Because I didn't want to know. The officers took notes, asked more questions, explained the process, told Amber she needed to come with them voluntarily or they'd return with a warrant. Through it all, I stood by the window, watching, feeling strangely detached from the chaos unfolding in my living room. This was my family, my son, the mother of my grandchildren, and I was watching them be led toward consequences I'd set in motion. Part of me waited for guilt, for regret, for the instinct to protect them that mothers supposedly never lose. But all I felt was tired and certain, and finally, after years of being diminished, powerful. Before Amber left with the officers, she turned to me one last time. "The kids," she said desperately, her voice cracking. "Please, whatever you do to me, don't let this destroy them. They love you. They need you." And there it was, the final manipulation. Using my love for my grandchildren as a weapon one last time. "I know they do," I said quietly, my voice soft but unmoved, which is exactly why they need to see that actions have consequences, that stealing is wrong, that respect isn't optional. The officers escorted Amber out. Scott followed silently. Before he left, he paused at the door. "I failed you, Mom," he said simply, tears streaming down his face. "I know that now. I'm sorry it took all this for me to see it." "Yes," I agreed softly, acknowledging the truth without softening it. "You did." He nodded, then left. The door closed behind them. The house fell silent, except for the persistent ticking of that clock and the AC humming its familiar rhythm. I walked back to my dining room, looked at all the evidence still spread across the table, all those documents that had seemed so important hours ago. My phone buzzed. A text from Martha. "Are you okay? Do you need me to come over?" I smiled, typed back, "I'm fine. Better than fine. I'm free." But even as I sent it, I knew tomorrow would bring new challenges. The legal process, the family fallout, the gossip, the judgment, and my grandchildren. God, my grandchildren. How would I face them after this? The answer to that question came 3 days later. I was sitting on my back porch with morning coffee when I heard the gate creak open. Small footsteps on the wooden deck. a tentative knock, even though the door was already open. "Grandma?" Mia's voice, soft, uncertain, nothing like her usual exuberance. I turned around, both grandchildren stood there, Mia clutching her brother's hand, their faces serious and confused in that way kids get when the adult world stops making sense. My heart cracked, actually physically ached in my chest. "Come here, sweethearts," I said gently, opening my arms. They hesitated, just for a second, then rushed forward and buried themselves against me. Mia started crying immediately. Her brother fought it, but I felt his shoulders shaking. We sat like that for a long time, me holding them holding me, the morning sun warming us all while the world stayed complicated and broken around us. "Is Mom going to jail?" Mia finally asked, her voice muffled against my shoulder. I considered lying, softening it, but I'd spent too long being complicit in comfortable fictions. "I don't know yet, sweetheart," I said honestly, stroking her hair. "She did some things that were wrong, very wrong. There are consequences for that." "Your dad says you're mad at us," her brother said quietly, his voice thick with unshed tears, "that we can't see you anymore." That stopped me cold. "Your father said that?" He nodded against my chest. I pulled back gently, looked at both their faces, saw the fear and confusion there, saw them waiting for me to confirm their worst suspicions. "Listen to me carefully," I said firmly, cupping both their faces so they'd meet my eyes. "I am not mad at you. I will never be mad at you for things the adults did. You are not responsible for your mother's choices." Relief flooded their features. Mia started crying harder. "But I need you to understand something," I continued seriously, my voice steady with gentle authority. "What your mother did, taking money that wasn't hers, lying about it, that was wrong. And when people do wrong things, they face consequences. That's how the world works." "Even family?" Mia asked in a small voice. "Especially family," I said softly, but firmly, "because family should treat each other better than anyone else, not worse." We talked for over an hour. I didn't give them all the details. They didn't need the full weight of adult betrayal yet. But I didn't lie either, didn't pretend everything would magically return to normal. They asked hard questions. I gave honest answers. And slowly, I watched some of the confusion lift from their faces. When Scott came to pick them up, he looked like he'd aged a decade. His eyes were hollow, his clothes rumpled, the successful corporate image completely demolished. "Thank you for seeing them," he said quietly at the door, shame coating every word. "I wasn't sure you would." "They're my grandchildren," I said simply, my tone neutral but clear. "They always will be. But Scott, we need to talk. Actually talk. Not the way we've been avoiding truth for years." He nodded, swallowed hard. "I know. I'm ready. Whenever you are." That conversation happened 2 weeks later, at my lawyer's office. Rebecca Chen sat between us, professional and watchful. Scott had brought his own documentation, proof that he'd separated his finances from Amber's, filed for a legal separation, started therapy, begun the painful process of untangling himself from the mess. "I enabled this," he said heavily, his voice raw with acknowledgement. "By being weak, by not asking questions, by choosing comfort over courage. I enabled her to hurt you." I sat across from him, studied the son I'd raised, saw genuine remorse in his eyes, but also saw the weakness that had allowed this to happen. "Yes," I agreed quietly, refusing to soften the truth. "You did." He flinched but didn't argue. "The question is," I continued carefully, "what happens now? Can you rebuild trust? Can you show up differently?" "I want to try," he said earnestly, desperation and hope mixing in his voice. If you'll let me. I know I don't deserve another chance, but the kids need their grandmother. And honestly, I need my mother. Rebecca looked at me, raised an eyebrow slightly. The decision was mine. I thought about Robert, about what he would have wanted. Not the enabling of bad behavior, but the possibility of redemption for someone willing to do the work. Here are my terms, I said firmly, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. Full financial separation. You rebuild your stability independently. No access to my accounts, ever again. We establish clear boundaries around money, respect, and communication. Scott nodded quickly, relief washing over his features. Whatever you need, I agree to all of it. I'm not finished, I continued steadily, holding his gaze. You also commit to family therapy, with me, with the kids. We rebuild this relationship properly, or we don't rebuild it at all. Yes, he said without hesitation, gratitude thick in his voice. Absolutely yes. Rebecca drafted the agreement right there. Legal boundaries put into writing. Protection for all of us. A framework for moving forward that didn't require blind trust.
Scott signed without arguing, then looked at me with tears in his eyes. I'm sorry, Mom, he said simply, his voice breaking with genuine remorse. For all of it. For not protecting you. For not seeing you. For taking you for granted. I know, I said softly, acknowledging without absolving. We'll see if sorry becomes different behavior. As for Amber, the federal prosecution moved forward. Derek's arrest opened up everything. Dozens of victims came forward. The case became massive. Amber took a plea deal, testified against Derek in exchange for reduced charges. She'd serve 2 years in minimum security, then probation, restitution payments that would follow her for decades. Part of me felt satisfaction at that, the vindication of being believed, of having the truth acknowledged publicly. But mostly I just felt tired and sad. Sad for what could have been if different choices had been made. I restructured everything, created a trust for the grandchildren's education, one neither Scott nor Amber could touch, set up monthly allowances with strict conditions, built financial boundaries that protected everyone, especially myself. Martha helped me through all of it, showed up with tea and practical advice and the steady friendship I'd needed all along.
6 months later, I was sitting by the lake, the same spot where I used to come with Robert, where we'd talk about retirement and grandchildren and growing old together. The water was still, glass smooth in the late afternoon light. Spanish moss hung from the cypress trees like nature's curtains. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the fight, the cost, the consequences, and I realized something profound. I wasn't angry anymore, wasn't bitter, wasn't consumed by the injustice of it all. I was just myself, fully, completely, without apology. For years, I'd made myself smaller, quieter, more convenient. I'd absorbed disrespect because demanding respect felt selfish. I'd enabled bad behavior because holding boundaries felt cruel. But I'd learned something valuable through all this pain. Protecting yourself isn't cruelty. Setting boundaries isn't selfishness. Demanding respect isn't arrogance. It's survival. It's dignity. It's love. For yourself, and ultimately for the people who need to learn how to treat others properly.
My phone buzzed. A text from Mia. She was allowed supervised calls now, working through her own therapy, processing her mother's choices. "Grandma, can we come visit this weekend? I miss you." I smiled, typed back, "Of course, sweetheart. I'll make lemon cake." The response came immediately, a string of heart emojis and excitement. I set the phone down, watched the sun starting to set over the water, felt the warm breeze carrying the smell of magnolia and cut grass. Robert used to say that the hardest battles we fight aren't against enemies. They're against the parts of ourselves that would rather avoid conflict than stand up for what's right. I understood that now. Really understood it. I'd fought. I'd stood up. I'd reclaimed my voice and my power and my life. And I'd survived. More than survived. I'd transformed. The woman who'd sat silently while being mocked at family dinners was gone. The woman who'd absorbed disrespect rather than cause discomfort had evolved. In her place stood someone stronger, someone clearer, someone who knew her worth wasn't determined by other people's treatment. I was Evelyn Patterson, 68 years old, widow, mother, grandmother, fighter. And I would never, never let myself disappear again. The lake reflected the sunset in rippling gold and orange. Beautiful, peaceful, whole, just like me. Finally, gloriously, unashamedly, just like me.